the suitcase was already packed. That was the first thing I noticed when I walked into my bedroom that Christmas morning. My son hadn't packed it himself. He's never been good at folding. Those edges were too clean, too precise. That was her work. He was standing in the doorway, and he couldn't quite meet my eyes. He kept looking at some spot just past my left ear, and he said, "Mom, we need to talk about the arrangement. We've been thinking." That word hit me somewhere deep. He put his hand on the suitcase handle and he said, "Mom, it's time to move on. We think it would be better for everyone." And he handed me a folder. A folder, like I was a tenant being processed. I stood there in my own bedroom, in the house I had lived in for 31 years, the house where I had raised him, and I looked at that folder and then I looked at my son's face and I thought, quietly, without any anger at all, I thought, he has no idea what I already know, but I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where all of this really started. Before I tell you the rest of this story, I want to ask you something small. If you have ever felt invisible in a family that you gave everything to, if you have ever smiled and said, "Of course," when everything inside you was breaking, I want you to hit that subscribe button right now. Every week I share stories just like this one, real women, real lives, real moments of quiet strength. And if this story matters to you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. All right, let me tell you about Beverly. My name is Beverly, Beverly Ann Calloway, though nobody has called me Beverly Ann since my mother passed in 1998. I was born in Knoxville, Tennessee, in the winter of 1952. Third of 5 children. My father worked at the paper mill. My mother kept the house and kept all of us together with very little money and a great deal of love and determination. We weren't poor in the way that people mean when they say poor now. We had enough. We just didn't have extra, and I learned early that you don't wait around for extra. You make do with what you have and you are grateful. I married my husband, Gerald, in 1974, was 22 years old, and I thought I understood what marriage was going to be. I did not yet, but Gerald was a good man, a quiet man, a man who showed love through actions rather than words, and we built something real together, something that lasted. We had one son, Thomas Gerald Calloway, born July 14th, 1977. He weighed 7 pounds and 4 ounces, and he had Gerald's ears and my stubbornness, and from the first moment I held him, I loved him with the kind of love that has no bottom to it, the kind of love that just keeps going no matter what. I raised Thomas in a house on Sycamore Ridge Road, a yellow house with white shutters, and a porch where Gerald liked to sit in the evenings. We weren't a dramatic family. We weren't a loud family. We had Sunday dinners and summer vacations to the lake and Christmas mornings that smelled like cinnamon rolls, and the particular kind of ordinary happiness that people don't appreciate until it's gone. Gerald passed in 2013, a heart attack, quick and unexpected, on a Tuesday afternoon in March. He was 64 years old. I was alone after that in a way I had not anticipated, not just the loneliness of the empty house, but a deeper kind of alone, the kind that comes when the person who knew you best, who remembered who you were before you were anyone's mother or anyone's anything, when that person is gone. Thomas was 36 when his father died. He was living in Columbus, Ohio by then. He called every Sunday. He came home for holidays. He was attentive in the way that adult children are attentive when they feel a little guilty for having their own lives. And then 2 years after Gerald passed, Thomas met Renee. Part 2. Renee came into our lives in the spring of 2015. Thomas called me on a Thursday evening, which was unusual because he was a Sunday caller, and he said, "Mom, I want you to know I've been seeing someone. Her name is Renee. I think it's serious." I was glad for him. I was genuinely glad. Thomas had been on his own for a long time, and he deserved someone. Every mother wants her child to be loved by a good person. I met Renee for the first time at Thanksgiving that year. She drove down with Thomas from Columbus, and she brought a sweet potato casserole and a very practiced smile. She was pretty. Dark hair, always very put together. The kind of woman who matched her accessories. She was 31 to Thomas's 30. She worked in marketing for a hospital network, something she mentioned often in ways that made clear she thought it was impressive. That first Thanksgiving she was perfectly pleasant. She helped clear the plates. She complimented my kitchen. She asked questions about my life in that way people do when they are trying to make a good impression. I noticed one thing though. It was small, the kind of thing you file away without meaning to. When I told the story about Gerald and the time he got the truck stuck in the river on our camping trip in 1989, Thomas laughed the way he always laughed at that story, that whole body laugh that he gets from his father. And Renee smiled. but her eyes went to her phone. Just for a second. Just a flicker. That was all. Just a flicker. I told myself I was being unfair. First impressions are hard. She was nervous. Anyone would be nervous meeting their boyfriend's mother for the first time at Thanksgiving. I told myself that for a long time. They married in June of 2017. A nice wedding at a vineyard outside Columbus. I sat in the front row in a blue dress, and I cried the right kind of tears, and I meant them. I wanted this for my son. I truly did. The first year of their marriage was ordinary. Thomas called a little less frequently, which I expected. They were building their life. I understood that. But there was a shift I couldn't quite name. The calls went from every Sunday to every other Sunday, then to once a month. The conversations got shorter. They started to feel like check-ins rather than conversations. Like Thomas was ticking a box. I kept telling myself he was just busy. That's what mothers do. We make excuses for the people we love. In 2018, Renee got pregnant. Thomas called to tell me and I cried on the phone. Happy tears, real ones, a grandchild. That is something Gerald would have loved so much. My granddaughter, Lily, was born in February of 2019. She had Thomas's ears, just like he had Gerald's. And when I held her for the first time, I felt something come alive in me that had gone quiet since Gerald died. I drove up to Columbus the week after she came home from the hospital. I stayed for 10 days. I cooked and I cleaned and I did laundry and I held Lily so Renee could sleep. I was careful. I tried to be useful without being in the way. I tried to read the room. Looking back now, I can see that I was already managing myself around Renee. Already making myself smaller, already editing my words before I spoke them. I didn't recognize it then as a warning sign. I thought I was just being considerate. By Lily's first birthday, the Sunday dinners had begun. It was Thomas's idea. He called and said, "Mom, why don't you come up once a month? We could do a Sunday dinner. Lily's getting to the age where she'll remember things." I said yes so fast it probably embarrassed both of us. So that's what we did. The first Sunday of every month, I drove the 3 hours from Knoxville to Columbus. I always brought something, a pie or a pot of soup or ingredients to make my mother's cornbread. I cooked, we ate, I played with Lily. I drove home. For 2 years, this was the rhythm, and I loved it. I loved it, even when Renee stayed on her laptop while I was there. Even when she scheduled things on those Sundays, sometimes a brunch with her friends or a yoga class, so she wasn't home for part of the day. Even when Thomas seemed distracted and a little absent in a way I couldn't quite put my finger on. I loved the Sundays because of Lily. And I told myself everything else was fine. And that was when I noticed something I had been missing for years. I noticed that no matter how early I arrived, no matter how carefully I timed my visits, Renee was always just leaving or just coming back. We were never in the same room for more than an hour. Never. At first I thought it was coincidence. Then I thought maybe she was giving me time alone with Thomas and Lily, which was considerate. Then one Sunday I arrived and Thomas answered the door with Lily on his hip and he said, "Oh, Renee's not feeling well. She's upstairs resting." And through the ceiling I heard her on the phone, laughing. I didn't say anything. I just smiled and I said, "Oh, that's a shame." And I walked to the kitchen and I started unpacking the groceries. I smiled and said, "Of course," but something small broke inside me every single time. The year Lily turned 4. They built the addition. They added a full suite onto the back of their house, a bedroom and a sitting room and a small bathroom. Thomas called to tell me about it and I thought, foolishly, with complete and total foolishness, I thought maybe it was for me. Maybe they wanted me closer. Maybe things were shifting. He told me over the phone what the addition was for. Renee's mother was moving in. Patricia, Renee's mother. Patricia, who lived in Phoenix, who was 63 years old, 11 years younger than me, and entirely capable of living alone. I asked Thomas why, and he said, "Renee feels better having her nearby. For Lily, for help around the house." I said, "I see." He said, "Mom, you understand, right? It's just easier. She's already here in Columbus." I said, "Of course, I understand completely." I hung up the phone, and I sat in my kitchen for a long time. For 11 years, every first Sunday of the month, I had driven 3 hours each way to cook a meal in my son's house. I had never once asked to be reimbursed for the groceries. I had never once asked them to come to me instead. I had never once said, "This is hard on my body. 3 hours is a long drive. Maybe you could meet me halfway." Not once. And they had built a suite for Patricia. I want to be careful here because I do not want to be unfair to Patricia. She never did anything wrong to me directly. She was pleasant enough when we overlapped at holidays. She was simply there. And then she was there permanently, in a room that had been built for her. That Christmas, 2 months after Patricia moved in, I drove to Columbus. I knocked on the door. Patricia answered. Not Thomas, not Renee. Patricia, wearing an apron that I recognized as the one I had left there the previous summer. She smiled and said, Beverly, come on in. There in the living room. Something about that moment was very clarifying, but the worst of it was still coming. That was not the darkest part, not even close. In March of the following year, Renee sat me down after Sunday dinner and told me, very gently, very carefully, in that particular voice people use when they have rehearsed what they want to say. She told me that they had been thinking about the Sunday dinners. She said, Beverly, we love that you come, but Lily has activities on Sundays now and Patricia is here, and honestly, the schedule is just getting complicated. Thomas was sitting right next to her. He did not look at me. Renee said, we were thinking maybe we'd shift to every other month, or maybe just holidays. We want to make sure we're being realistic about everyone's bandwidth. Bandwidth? She used the word bandwidth, about whether my son had room in his schedule to see me. I looked at Thomas. He was looking at the table. I said, of course, whatever works best for your family. Your family. I heard myself say it. Your family. Not our family. Your family. And nobody corrected me. Part 5. I drove home that Sunday in March and something had shifted in me. I have tried to explain this shift to people, and it is hard to put into words. It was not anger exactly. It was not sadness exactly. It was more like a great quiet, like a decision being made somewhere deep inside me without my full participation. I started paying attention differently. The following week, I called my attorney, a woman named Darlene, who had handled Gerald's estate. I asked her about property law in Tennessee and I asked her to explain my rights regarding the house on Sycamore Ridge Road. Darlene was thorough and she was kind. She asked me a few questions. I answered them honestly. Then, I called my neighbor, Estelle. Estelle has been my neighbor for 22 years, and she is the closest thing I have to a best friend. She is 74, uses a cane, and has no patience for nonsense of any kind. She is exactly the kind of woman I want in my corner. I told Estelle the full story, everything that Dennis, Patricia, the bandwidth comment, all of it. Estelle was quiet for a long time when I finished. Then she said, Beverly, can I ask you something? I said, yes. She said, have you looked at what your house is worth lately? I hadn't. Not recently. She said, I think you should. I did not understand yet what she was suggesting. I would understand soon. The following week, I got a call from Thomas. He said, Mom, we need to talk about something serious. He came to Knoxville the following Saturday, alone, without Renee, which I noticed. He sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and he told me that he and Renee had been talking about the future, about planning ahead. He said, Mom, this house is a lot for you to maintain alone. It's been 11 years since Dad died and we worry about you. We think it would make sense to talk about options. I said, what kind of options? He said, the house is worth a lot now. The market is good. If you sold, you'd have money for a really nice place. Something smaller, something easier to manage. I said, where would I go? He said, there are some really lovely communities, active senior communities. You'd make friends. You wouldn't be alone. I looked at my son across my kitchen table, the table where he had done homework as a child, the table where we had sat the morning Gerald died, the table where I had rolled out pie crust for 40 years. I said, Thomas, is this your idea, or Renee? And he looked at that spot past my left ear, that same spot from Christmas morning. He said, Mom, it's what's best for everyone. What he did not know, what neither of them knew, was that Estelle had already introduced me to her niece whose name was Kim, who was a real estate agent, who had already walked through my house the previous Tuesday, who had already given me a number that made me sit down when she said it out loud. And what Thomas did not know, because I had not told him, was that I had already been in contact with my attorney Darlene for 3 weeks, quietly, carefully. The house was in my name, only my name. Gerald had put it in my name 31 years ago for reasons I will explain. And under Tennessee law, as Darlene had carefully walked me through, I could do exactly what I wanted with it. What they did not know about me would have surprised them deeply. I need to tell you about Gerald and the house. Gerald was a careful man, a man who thought about the future. When we bought the house on Sycamore Ridge in 1986, Gerald insisted it go in my name alone. His mother had died with property in both names and the estate had been complicated and expensive. Gerald did not want that for me. He said, Beverly, if anything ever happens to me, I don't want you fighting with lawyers. This house is yours. Clean. So it was in my name. It had always been in my name. Thomas knew this. but I think he had stopped thinking about it as a real thing. I think it had become abstract in his mind, just a fact about a document somewhere, not an actual reality with actual consequences. Over the weeks after Thomas's visit, I moved quietly and deliberately. I called Kim every few days. I asked questions. I learned things I had not known about real estate and about the market and about what my options actually were. I had coffee with Darlene twice. She was very thorough. She explained things slowly and carefully, and she did not make me feel foolish for not knowing them. I started going through the house, not in a dramatic way, not in a grief-stricken way, methodically, thoughtfully, box by box. I found the letters Gerald had written me when he was away for 6 weeks in 1981 on a work project in Atlanta. 41 letters in a shoebox. I sat on the floor of the closet and I read every single one. Then I put them carefully back in the box and I put the box in the stack of things I was keeping. I found Thomas's report cards from elementary school, his Little League participation ribbon from 1986. A drawing he had made in second grade of our family, everyone with huge round heads and stick legs and Gerald much taller than anyone else, which was accurate. He was 6'2". I kept all of Thomas's things, every single piece. I did not throw away one photograph or one drawing or one report card, but I was getting ready. Estelle came over on a Tuesday evening and we sat on the porch and she helped me make a list. She was very practical about it. She said, "Beverly, write down what you want, not what's practical, not what's easy, what you actually want your life to look like." I had not been asked that question in a very long time. I thought about it for a while. Then I wrote down 3 things: quiet, warmth, and Lily. I wanted to be near Lily, not in the complicated, managed, bandwidth-scheduled way that had become my Sunday dinners. Near her in a real way, in the way grandmothers are supposed to be, and what I was planning was going to make that possible, just not in the way any of them expected. Part 7. What Thomas and Renee did not know about me would take a while to explain. They saw a woman who was 71 years old and alone in a yellow house in Knoxville, Tennessee. They saw a woman who drove 3 hours every first Sunday and brought a pie and cooked a roast and left quietly. They saw a woman who said of course when asked to visit less, who said of course when her room was given to a contractor, who said of course when her son handed her a folder about senior living communities. They did not know about the money. Gerald had been a careful man in more ways than the house. In 1987, he had taken out a whole life insurance policy, a modest one, because that was what we could afford at the time. But he had kept it, never borrowed against it, never changed it. For 26 years he had paid the premium every month without fail. When Gerald died in 2013, that policy paid out. I did not tell Thomas the full amount. He knew about it in the way children know about things they assume are smaller than they are. He assumed I was managing, living off Social Security and a small savings account and the occasional help he offered, which I always declined. What he did not know was that Darlene had helped me invest a significant the portion of that payout in 2013, conservatively, carefully, and that it had grown. I am not going to tell you the number because that is private, but I will tell you that when Kim told me what my house was worth, and I added those 2 numbers together, I was not a woman who needed her son's help planning her future. I was a woman with options, real options, and I had been sitting on a porch in Knoxville, letting my son talk to me about senior living communities without saying a word about any of it. There is one more thing they did not know. Estelle's niece Kim was not the only person she had introduced me to. Kim's colleague, a developer named Preston who was buying and renovating older homes in a particular part of Knoxville, had been in touch with Estelle for months about the neighborhood. When Estelle told him about my house, casually, carefully, he made an inquiry. Then he made an offer that was, by Darlene's assessment, exceptionally good. I signed the paperwork on a Thursday afternoon in April. Darlene witnessed it. Estelle sat in the waiting room with a thermos of coffee and a mystery novel. I did not tell Thomas, not yet. Part 8. Thomas called on a Sunday in May. He was cheerful, that slightly too cheerful tone that means he was about to say something he had prepared. He asked how I was. He asked about my garden. He made small talk for longer than usual. Then he said, "Mom, Renee and I have been looking at a few communities we think you'd really love. There's one about 40 minutes from us in Columbus. Really lovely. They have a garden program." He said it like the garden program was a prize. I let him finish. Then I said, "Thomas, I need to tell you something. I told him I had sold the house. Silence, not a short silence, a long one. The kind of silence that means someone is trying to recalculate very fast. He said, "What?" I said, "I sold the house to a developer. It closed last Thursday. I'm moving in June." He said, "Mom, wait, where are you moving?" I told him I had found a house, a small house, not a community, not a complex, a house with a porch, 3 bedrooms, in a town called Berea, Kentucky. He said, "Berea, why Berea?" I told him, because Berea, Kentucky is 1 hour and 22 minutes from Columbus, Ohio, which is close enough to see Lily on a Tuesday afternoon if I want to, which is close enough to be a real grandmother in a real way, but far enough that nobody is managing my schedule. And then I told him the rest. I told him that I had already spoken to my attorney and that my estate documents were updated and very clear. I told him that I was healthy, that my doctor had given me an excellent report at my last checkup, that I was not in need of a plan to be managed. I told him that I loved him. And then I said something I had been saving. I said, "Thomas, I heard what you didn't say at that kitchen table in March. And I want you to know I'm not angry, but I am going to tell you plainly, one time, and then we're not going to speak of it again." I said, "Your father put that house in my name because he trusted me to know what was right for me. And I do." He was quiet again. Then his voice changed. The prepared tone left, and what came back was something younger, something I recognized. He said, "Mom, I'm sorry." He said it quietly, without Renee, without a script. I said, "I know, honey, I know you are." Part 9. I moved to Berea, Kentucky on June 14th. Estelle helped me pack. Kim's team handled the logistics. Darlene oversaw the transfer. It was the most organized I have ever been in my life. The house in Berea has a porch facing east, so I get the morning light. It has a small garden bed along the south side that I have already planted with tomatoes and zinnias, and the particular kind of lavender that my mother used to keep. The 3rd bedroom has a twin bed with a white quilt and a small bookshelf. It is Lily's room. I furnished it with that intention, and I told Thomas and Renee that it was there, plainly and without drama. The first time they came to visit, they came in July. All of them, Renee and Thomas and Lily and Patricia. I cooked a roast. Nobody was managing anyone's bandwidth. Lily saw her room, and she ran and she jumped on the bed, and she said, "Grandma Beverly, is this my room?" And I said, "Yes, baby, that room is yours." I want to tell you about the moment with Renee. We were in the kitchen, just the 2 of us, while Thomas took Lily out to look at the garden. Renee was quiet for a moment, and then she said something I did not expect. She said, "Beverly, I wasn't kind to you. I know that." I looked at her. She said, "I was insecure. I think I wanted Thomas's attention to be, I don't know. I was territorial, and I took it out on you in ways that were." She paused. She said, "It wasn't right." I thought about everything I could say to that. I thought about the apron, the bandwidth, the suitcase that was already packed. I said, "Renee, I'm not interested in going over the past. I'm interested in Lily knowing her grandmother. Can we agree to that?" She said, "Yes. We are not best friends. I will not pretend that, but we are something more honest than what we were before." Thomas calls every Sunday now. Not every other Sunday, every Sunday. I have had a lot of time to think about what I learned from all of this. Here is the first thing. Quiet endurance is not the same as weakness. For a long time I confused the two. I thought that accepting the scraps I was given was a form of grace. It is not. Grace is knowing your own worth and acting from that place. I confused patience with erasure. They are not the same. The second thing I learned is that other people's plans for you are mostly about their own fear and their own convenience. Thomas was not a bad son. He was a frightened man trying to manage a situation that made him uncomfortable. He did not know how to hold his wife's needs and his mother's dignity at the same time, and so he chose the path of least immediate resistance. That is a failure of courage, not a failure of love. The third thing I learned is the most important. You are never as without options as you feel in the darkest moment. Never. In March, when I sat at that kitchen table and heard the word bandwidth, I felt very small and very alone. But by April, I had signed the papers. By June, I had a porch facing east and a room with a white quilt. The space between those 2 moments was not luck. It was Estelle asking me the right question. It was Darlene being thorough. It was Gerald putting the house in my name 31 years ago because he knew me. You are built of more than the last hard thing that happened to you. I want you to remember that. It's a Sunday morning as I'm telling you this, early, before the heat of the day. I'm on my porch in Berea. Kentucky with a cup of coffee, and the lavender is blooming along the south side of the house, and the light is coming up gold over the hill to the east. In 3 weeks, Lily is coming to stay for 5 days. Just Lily. Thomas and Renee are taking a trip, and Lily asked if she could stay with Grandma Beverly. She asked Thomas, who told me, and I could hear in his voice that he was glad she asked. I think about the woman I was in March, sitting at my son's kitchen table, saying, of course, when something inside me was very quietly breaking. I think about the suitcase that was already packed that Christmas morning, and I think about how I looked at it and thought, calmly, they have no idea what I already know. What I already knew was this: the house was mine, the money was mine, my life was mine, it had always been mine. I had just temporarily forgotten to act like it. If you are sitting somewhere today feeling invisible in a family that you have given everything to, if you are making excuses for people who have stopped making room for you, I want you to hear this. You are not out of options. You have never been out of options. You are simply waiting for the right question to be asked. Find your Estelle. Find your Darlene. Write down what you actually want, and then, quietly and permanently, go get it.